1. The Oracle's Whisper. The morning mist clung to the slopes of Mount Parnassus like the breath of sleeping gods. In the sacred precinct of Delphi, where the earth itself seemed to exhale prophecy, the Pythia sat upon her tripod, eyes rolled back in divine ecstasy. The sweet smoke of burning laurel leaves and barley meal filled the chamber, and through the haze she spoke words that would echo through eternity. There is no man wiser than Socrates of Athens. Chaerephon, the young Athenian who had posed the question, felt his knees weaken. He had expected perhaps a riddle, a cryptic verse about his friend's future. Instead, the oracle had delivered a pronouncement that seemed to mock everything he knew about the stonemason's son, who wandered barefoot through the agora, claiming to know nothing. The priestess's voice faded to a whisper, then silence. Only the eternal flame flickered in the sacred chamber, casting dancing shadows on the walls where countless pilgrims had come seeking wisdom. But wisdom, it seemed, had chosen its own vessel, a man who denied possessing it. As Chaerephon descended the sacred mountain, the oracle's words haunted him. How could Socrates, who professed ignorance about all things, be the wisest man in Athens? The city teemed with sophists who could argue any position, politicians who commanded armies, poets who moved the hearts of thousands. Yet the god had spoken, and gods, unlike men, did not lie. The second, the youth, and the awakening. 30 years earlier, in a modest workshop near the Athenian agora, young Socrates bent over a block of Pentelic marble, his father's chisel firm in his weathered hands. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that slanted through the doorway, and the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of metal on stone provided a steady counterpoint to the distant sounds of the marketplace. "Feel the stone, my son," Sophroniscus murmured, guiding his boy's hands. "Every block holds its truth. Our task is not to impose our will upon it, but to discover what already lies within." The young man's dark eyes studied the marble intently. Where others saw only cold stone, Socrates perceived something alive, waiting. His fingers traced the rough surface, seeking the hidden form that slept beneath. Yet even as he worked, his mind wandered to questions that seemed to have no answers. "Father," he said, pausing in his work, "the priests say the gods are just, yet they tell stories of Zeus deceiving mortals and Ares delighting in bloodshed. If the gods are truly just, how can they act unjustly?" Sophroniscus set down his own tools and regarded his son with a mixture of pride and concern. The boy had always been different, too thoughtful, too questioning. While other children played at war games or listened wide-eyed to the heroic tales of Homer, Socrates dissected every story, every assumption, like a physician examining a corpse. "Perhaps," the older man said carefully, "the stories are not meant to be taken as literal truth. Then what are they meant for? And if the stories of the gods are not true, what is?" That evening, as Athens settled into the purple dusk, Socrates found himself drawn to the house of Anaxagoras, the philosopher from Clazomene who had recently come to Athens. The man's radical ideas had already stirred controversy. He claimed that the sun was not a god, but a fiery stone, larger than the Peloponnese, and that the moon was made of earth and stone, like the ground beneath their feet. In the philosopher's modest courtyard, surrounded by a handful of eager students, Socrates listened as Anaxagoras spoke of mind, nous, as the organizing principle of the cosmos, not the whimsical gods of Homer, but pure intelligence ordering the universe according to rational laws. But if mind truly governs all things, Socrates ventured, his voice cutting through the twilight, why do we see so much that seems random and unjust? Why do good men suffer while the wicked prosper? Anaxagoras smiled at the earnest young face. You ask the right questions, young sculptor. Perhaps the answer lies not in condemning the world for its apparent chaos, but in examining our own understanding. How can we claim to know what is truly good or just when we have not even examined what these words mean? That night, Socrates lay sleepless on his simple bed, staring at the stars that wheeled overhead. The old certainties of his childhood, the gods, the heroes, the unexamined truths passed down from generation to generation, seemed suddenly fragile as clay vessels. Yet rather than despair, he felt a strange exhilaration. If the old answers were insufficient, then perhaps it was time to ask better questions. The next morning, he set aside his chisel and walked into the agora with empty hands, but a mind full of wonder. Third, the streets of Athens, the philosophical mission. The news of the oracle's pronouncement reached Socrates as he sat in the shade of a plane tree, his bare feet dusty from wandering the streets of Athens. Chaerephon's face was flushed with excitement and bewilderment as he recounted the Pythia's words. The wisest man in Athens. Socrates laughed, a sound like pebbles rattling in an amphora. Surely the god mocks me. I know that I know nothing. How can this be wisdom? But the oracle's words gnawed at him. If Apollo himself, speaking through his priestess, declared him wise, then there must be some truth hidden in the riddle. And so Socrates set out to solve the mystery, questioning those who were reputed to be wise to see what their wisdom might teach him about his own. His first visit was to Euthyphro, a religious expert who had gained fame for his knowledge of divine law. Socrates found him in the portico of the king Archon, where he had come to prosecute his own father for murder. "Euthyphro, my friend," Socrates called out, his voice warm with genuine curiosity. "How fortunate to meet you here. I have always admired your deep knowledge of religious matters. Tell me, since you are about to act in the name of piety, what exactly is piety?" Euthyphro puffed up with pride. "Piety is what I am doing now, prosecuting wrongdoers, whether they are one's father or anyone else." "Ah, but that is merely an example of pious action, not piety itself. You have given me one instance when you might have given me the universal form. What is the essential nature of piety that makes all pious actions pious?" The religious expert frowned. "Piety is what is loved by the gods." "But the gods disagree among themselves, do they not? They love different things, sometimes opposite things. How can the same action be both pious and impious?" As the conversation continued, Euthyphro's confident assertions began to crumble like poorly mixed clay in a potter's kiln. His definitions contradicted themselves. His examples proved exceptions to his rules. Finally, claiming a sudden urgent appointment, he hurried away, leaving Socrates sitting alone, more perplexed than before. "Strange," Socrates murmured to himself. He seemed so certain of his wisdom, yet under examination it proved to be no wisdom at all. Perhaps I am wiser than Euthyphro in this small respect. while neither of us knows anything fine and good. He thinks he knows something when he does not, whereas as I do not know, so I do not think I know. His quest for wisdom led him next to Thrasymachus, the famous sophist whose rhetorical skills could make the weaker argument appear stronger. Socrates found him in the gymnasium, surrounded by young men eager to learn the arts of persuasion. Justice, Thrasymachus was declaring, his voice resonating with practiced authority, is nothing more than the interest of the stronger party. In every city, justice is whatever serves the ruling class. Socrates approached with his characteristic smile. Thrasymachus, how marvelous to hear such a clear definition of justice. But tell me, do you mean that whatever the stronger party believes to be in their interest is just, or what actually is in their interest? What they believe, of course. But surely the stronger party can make mistakes about their own interests. A ruler might think a certain law serves him when it actually harms him. Would you still call such a law just? The sophist's eyes narrowed. He sensed a trap, but could not see where it lay. Well, when I speak of the stronger party, I mean those who are truly stronger, those who do not make such mistakes. Ah, so you are saying that justice is what the ruler does insofar as he is a perfect ruler. But then we must ask, what is the art of perfect rulership? Does the physician, insofar as he is a physician, seek his own good or the good of his patient? Step by step, with relentless gentleness, Socrates dismantled Thrasymachus's position. The sophist's confident cynicism gave way to confusion, then anger. Like a bull tormented by a gadfly, he lashed out with personal attacks, but found nothing solid to strike. His audience, initially impressed by his worldly wisdom, began to drift away as his arguments collapsed into contradictions. "You are nothing but a pestilent gadfly," Thrasymachus snarled as he gathered his belongings. "You question everything, but offer nothing in return." "Perhaps," Socrates replied mildly, "but if I sting the city awake from complacent sleep, am I not performing a service? A lazy horse needs a gadfly to keep it moving." Word of these encounters spread through Athens like ripples from a stone cast into still water. Some laughed at the philosopher who exposed pretenders to wisdom. Others grew uncomfortable, recognizing themselves in those who had been questioned and found wanting. The city began to divide into those who saw Socrates as a beneficial gadfly and those who viewed him as a dangerous pest. Fourth, Alcibiades and the temptation of power. Among those drawn to Socrates was Alcibiades, the golden boy of Athenian politics, brilliant, beautiful, and utterly ruthless in his ambition. Where Socrates was homely and poor, Alcibiades was handsome and wealthy. Where the philosopher sought truth, the politician sought power. Yet between them grew an unlikely friendship that would test both men's souls. The two first met at a symposium in the house of Callias, where Athens's intellectual elite gathered to drink wine and engage in sophisticated conversation. Alcibiades, barely 20, but already famous for his beauty and brilliance, held court among a circle of admirers. His discourse was witty, his manner charming, his confidence absolute. Socrates entered late, as was his habit, and settled quietly in a corner. He listened as Alcibiades spoke of his plans to lead Athens to glory, to restore the empire to its former greatness, to eclipse even Pericles in fame and achievement. "And you, Socrates," Alcibiades called out with a mischievous smile, "what do you think of my ambitions? Surely even you must admire the desire for noble glory." The older man looked up from his wine cup, his eyes twinkling with gentle irony. "Tell me, Alcibiades, what is glory?" "Why, it is to be remembered by posterity, to have one's name sung by poets, to achieve great deeds that echo through the ages." "But is all fame glorious? Would you call notorious the same as glorious? And if glory consists in being remembered, then might not a tyrant who destroys cities be more glorious than a just man who builds them, simply because destruction is more memorable than creation?" The conversation continued deep into the night, with Alcibiades growing increasingly frustrated as his confident assertions were gently dismantled. Yet rather than driving him away, Socrates' questions seemed to fascinate the young politician like a snake charmed by music. "You bewitch me, Socrates," Alcibiades confessed, as the other guests departed. "In your presence, I feel ashamed of my life and my ambitions. Yet when I leave you, the world calls me back to its prizes." Years later, during the brutal campaigns of the Peloponnesian War, their friendship would be tested in blood and mud. At the siege of Potidæa, when Athenian forces were trapped and desperate, Socrates served as a hoplite in the ranks, an aging philosopher fighting alongside seasoned warriors. The battle was chaos. Athenian lines wavered under the first assault of Potidæan cavalry. Young Alcibiades, commanding a unit of elite troops, found himself cut off and surrounded, his horse dead beneath him, his arm bleeding from a spear thrust. Through the confusion, a figure emerged, Socrates, his shield battered but his step steady, cutting through enemy soldiers with the same methodical patience he brought to philosophical inquiry. He reached Alcibiades just as a Potidæan warrior raised his spear for the killing blow. The philosopher's spear took the enemy in the chest, and he hauled the wounded politician onto his shoulders, carrying him to safety through a storm of arrows and javelin casts. His own armor was pierced in 3 places, but he seemed as unperturbed as if walking through the agora. Later, as surgeons tended to Alcibiades' wounds, the young man grasped Socrates' hand. "You saved my life. The glory should be yours, the honors, the recognition." Socrates shook his head with that familiar smile. What good are honors to a man who does not know what honor truly is? "Keep your glory, Alcibiades. I have all the reward I need in knowing that I acted as I ought." But even as he spoke, Socrates watched his friend's eyes kindle with familiar ambition. He had saved Alcibiades' body, but the young man's soul remained trapped in the cave of worldly desires. Power called to him like a siren's song, and philosophy, for all its beauty, could not compete with the intoxication of dominion over others. "You perplex me, Socrates," Alcibiades murmured. "You could have anything, wealth, position, influence. Men would follow you if you asked, yet you choose poverty and questions. Why?" The philosopher gazed out at the setting sun, painting the battlefield in shades of gold and crimson. "Perhaps because I have learned that the unexamined life is not worth living. And perhaps because true wealth lies not in possessing much, but in needing little." V. The Trial. A Voice in the Dark. The charges were formally presented on a spring morning in 399 BCE, when the Athenian assembly gathered to hear accusations against Socrates, son of Sophroniscus. The prosecutor, Miletus, stood before the 500 citizen jurors, his voice ringing with righteous indignation. "Citizens of Athens, this man corrupts our youth with his impious teachings. He does not believe in the gods of the city, but introduces new deities. He makes the weaker argument appear stronger and teaches others to do the same. He is a danger to our democracy, our religion, our very way of life." In the defendant's dock, Socrates stood calmly, his weathered hands folded, his eyes bright, with something between amusement and sadness. At 70, his beard was white as Pentelic marble, his face lined with decades of laughter and thought. He looked more like a kindly grandfather than a dangerous subversive. When called upon to defend himself, Socrates approached the center of the court with his characteristic shuffle. No hired rhetorician would speak for him. No polished oration would plead his case. He would speak as he had always spoken, plainly, honestly, without artifice or guile. "Men of Athens," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air, "I am astonished at my accusers' persuasive words, though hardly anything they said was true. But what astonished me most was when they warned you to be on your guard, lest I deceive you by my eloquence. They must be utterly shameless to say this, since they will be immediately refuted by the facts when I show myself to be anything but an eloquent speaker." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Even his enemies had to admit that Socrates possessed a natural charm that made the gravest subjects seem almost playful. "I will speak to you in the same manner I am accustomed to use in the agora and in the shops where many of you have heard me. Do not be astonished or create a disturbance if I speak in my usual way. For this is the first time I have come before a court of law, though I am 70 years old. I am therefore simply foreign to the language of this place." He began to tell his story, how the oracle's pronouncement had set him on his mission to understand the nature of wisdom. He spoke of his encounters with politicians, poets, and craftsmen, how each claimed knowledge they did not possess. When I examined myself and reflected on this oracle, I found that I was in some small way wiser than these men. Neither of us knows anything fine and good, but he thinks he knows something when he does not, whereas as I do not know, so I do not think I know. It seems that I am wiser than he in this small respect, that what I do not know, I do not think I know. As he spoke, the courtroom grew quiet. Some jurors leaned forward, caught despite themselves by the philosopher's honesty. Others frowned, disturbed by implications they could not quite grasp. God gave me this mission, men of Athens, through oracles and dreams and in every way that divine providence ever commanded anyone to do anything. This is true and easily tested. If I am corrupting some of the young and have corrupted others, surely some of them, now grown older, would come forward to accuse me if they realized I had given them bad advice in their youth. He gestured to the crowd, where many former students sat listening. "Where are they? I see Crito here, my contemporary and fellow demesman, father of Critobulus here. I see Lysanias of Sphetus, father of Aeschines here. I see many others. If their sons were corrupted by me, surely these fathers would testify against me." But no such testimony came. Instead, those he had questioned over the years sat in uncomfortable silence, remembering how his gentle probing had exposed their ignorance and pretensions. Meletus, growing desperate, called for cross-examination. "Tell us, Socrates, do you believe in gods?" "Indeed, I do believe in gods, more than any of my accusers." "But you introduce new deities, daimonia, into the city." Socrates smiled with patient irony. "Tell me, Meletus, do you believe that there are human affairs without humans?" "Of course not." "And horse affairs without horses?" "No." "Then how can there be daimonic affairs without daimonies? And are not daimonies either gods or children of gods?" "Yes." "So if I believe in daimonic affairs, I must believe in daimonies, and if I believe in daimonies, I must believe in gods. You contradict yourself, Meletus. Either I believe in no gods, or I believe in gods. You cannot have it both ways." The prosecutor's face reddened as laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even in the dock, facing death, Socrates could not resist the opportunity to teach through questioning. But as the day wore on, the philosopher's tone grew more serious. He spoke of his life's work, his mission to awaken Athens from the sleep of unexamined assumptions. "Men of Athens, I am grateful and I love you, but I will obey the god rather than you, and as long as I draw breath and am able, I will not cease to practice philosophy, to exhort you and to make clear to whichever of you I happen to meet, saying, 'My good sir, you are an Athenian, a citizen of the greatest city with the greatest reputation for both wisdom and power. Are you not ashamed of your eagerness to possess as much wealth, reputation, and honors as possible, while you do not care for, nor give thought to wisdom or truth, or the best possible state of your soul?'" The words hung in the air like incense, beautiful and troubling. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably, recognizing themselves in the philosopher's gentle rebuke. "If you kill me," Socrates continued, his voice growing softer but more intense, "you will harm yourselves more than me. For I am your gadfly, given to the city by the god, and the city is like a great and noble horse that is somewhat sluggish because of its size and needs to be stirred up. I am that gadfly, constantly settling on you, arousing and persuading and reproaching each of you. You will not easily find another like me." The vote was close, closer than many had expected. 220 jurors voted for acquittal, 280 for conviction. Had 30 men changed their votes, Socrates would have walked free. Instead, he faced the penalty phase of his trial. Meletus demanded death. Socrates, given the opportunity to propose an alternative punishment, considered his options with characteristic irony. "What do I deserve for being such a man? Something good, men of Athens, if I must truly make the assessment according to my deserts. What is suitable for a poor benefactor who needs leisure to exhort you? Nothing is more suitable than for such a man to be given his meals in the Prytaneum. Much more suitable than for any of you who has won a victory at the Olympic Games with a horse or chariot." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Even those sympathetic to Socrates were shocked by his apparent arrogance. But the philosopher raised his hand for silence. "I am not speaking arrogantly or disdainfully. It is rather that I am convinced that I never willingly wronged anyone, though I am not convincing you of this, for we have had little time to talk together. If it were the law with us, as it is elsewhere, that a trial for life should not last one but many days, you would be convinced. But now it is not easy to dispel great slanders in a short time. Finally, at the urging of friends, he proposed a fine, first 1 mina, then when that seemed inadequate, 30 minas, guaranteed by Plato and other wealthy students. But it was too late. The jury, insulted by his initial proposal and unconvinced by his final offer, voted for death by an even larger margin than they had voted for conviction. Socrates received the verdict with the same calm he had shown throughout the trial. As the sun set over Athens, casting long shadows across the courtroom, he addressed his fellow citizens one final time. Death is one of two things. Either it is annihilation, and the dead have no consciousness of anything, or it is a change and a relocation for the soul from here to another place. If it is complete lack of consciousness, like a dreamless sleep, then death would be a great advantage. But if death is a journey to another place, and what we are told is true, that all who have died are there, what greater blessing could there be? His voice grew warm with anticipation. What would one not give to cross-examine the men of old, to converse with Orpheus and Musaeus, with Hesiod and Homer, to meet those who died through unjust legal decisions and compare my experience with theirs. Above all, to spend my time testing and examining people there as I do here, to see who among them is wise and who thinks he is but is not. As guards prepared to lead him away, Socrates turned to those who had voted for his acquittal. You must not think that what has happened to me is a misfortune. My familiar sign, my daimonic voice, has not opposed me at any point today, though it usually opposes me quite frequently in other affairs when I am about to do something wrong. This suggests to me that what has happened is good, and those of us who think death is an evil are probably mistaken. The courtroom fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Here was a man facing death with genuine equanimity, not the bravado of a warrior or the resignation of a victim, but the calm curiosity of a philosopher approaching the ultimate mystery. The unexamined life is not worth living, he repeated, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. But now the time has come to depart, I to die and you to live. Which of us goes to the better fate? Only the God knows. 6. The final hours, hemlock, and the soul. The prison cell was small and spare, its stone walls weeping with moisture from the morning dew. Sunlight slanted through the high barred window, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny souls in the golden air. Socrates sat on his simple cot, his hands folded peacefully in his lap, surrounded by friends who had come to spend his final hours with him. Crito, his oldest companion, paced the narrow space like a caged animal. His weathered face was drawn with grief and frustration. They had known each other since childhood, had grown old together in the streets of Athens, and now one would remain while the other departed for the undiscovered country. There is still time, Socrates, Crito urged, his voice tight with emotion. My friends have arranged everything. The guards can be bribed. A ship waits at Piraeus. Exile in Thessaly has been prepared. You need only say the word. The philosopher smiled with gentle affection. My dear Crito, your eagerness to help me escape is admirable, but it would be wrong. We have spent our lives seeking to live justly. Shall we abandon justice now when it proves inconvenient? But this verdict is unjust. The court was prejudiced. The charge is false. What justice is there in dying for crimes you did not commit? Socrates shifted on his cot, his movements slow but graceful despite his 70 years. Tell me, old friend, if we were to escape, what arguments could we make? That we should disobey the law when it suits us, that our private judgment should override the city's decision. What kind of citizens would we be then? Young Phaedo, barely past his 20th year, sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes bright with tears he was too proud to shed. But master, what if the laws themselves are corrupt? What if the city has lost its way? Even then, my boy, we must consider our obligations. Athens raised me, educated me, gave me the freedom to pursue philosophy for 70 years. The laws of Athens are like parents to me, sometimes harsh, sometimes mistaken, but still deserving of respect and obedience. Would a son strike his father simply because the old man had grown unreasonable? As the morning wore on, the conversation turned inevitably to the great mystery that awaited. What lay beyond death's threshold? Was consciousness extinguished like a snuffed candle, or did the soul journey on to new adventures? I confess, Socrates said, his eyes twinkling with familiar curiosity, I am eager to discover the answer. We have spent our lives in the pursuit of wisdom, yet we have barely scratched the surface of truth. Perhaps death is not the end of learning, but its true beginning. Simmias, another young follower, raised an objection. But master, how can we be sure the soul survives? Might it not be like the harmony of a lyre, something that exists only so long as the instrument remains intact? Socrates leaned forward, animated despite the circumstances. Even facing death, he could not resist a good philosophical discussion. An interesting comparison, Simmias. But consider this. Harmony is produced by the lyre, is it not? It depends upon the instrument for its existence. Yet the soul appears to rule the body, not merely emerge from it. When you choose to move your hand, does your hand teach your soul to desire movement? Or does your soul command your hand to obey? The argument continued for hours, with Socrates patiently examining each doubt and objection. His method remained unchanged. He asked questions, exposed contradictions, led his students through chains of reasoning toward glimpses of truth. Yet beneath the familiar intellectual exercise lay something new, a profound peace, as if the lifelong seeker had finally glimpsed the distant shores of certainty. The philosopher, he explained, spends his life practicing separation of soul from body. We seek truth not through the senses, which deceive us, but through pure thought. We value justice, beauty, and goodness not as physical objects, but as eternal forms. In a sense, we practice dying every day. Why then should we fear the final separation? As afternoon shadows lengthened, a guard appeared at the cell door. His face was kind but troubled. He had grown fond of the strange prisoner who treated everyone, even his jailers, with courteous respect. "Socrates," he said quietly, "it is time. The sun grows low, and the poison must be administered before darkness falls." The philosopher rose with dignity, smoothing his simple chiton. "Of course. We must not keep death waiting. It is, after all, our final appointment, and it would be rude to be late." The guard led them to a larger chamber, where the executioner waited. a thin professional man who had performed this duty many times. In his hands he held a cup carved from dark wood, filled with a mixture of hemlock and other herbs designed to bring a peaceful end. "I have overseen many executions," the man said softly, "but never one like this. Most men rage or weep or beg for mercy. You alone face death as calmly as if you were going to dinner with friends." Socrates accepted the cup with steady hands. "Perhaps because I am, in a sense. I go to join the company of all who have sought truth before me. Homer and Hesiod, Achilles and Hector, all the heroes and sages of old. What better dinner companions could a man desire?" He raised the cup slightly, as if offering a toast. "To my friends who remain, continue the search. Question everything, examine your lives, seek truth above comfort, and remember that the unexamined life is not worth living." The hemlock was bitter, but Socrates drained the cup without hesitation. He handed it back to the executioner and walked calmly about the room, as instructed, until his legs began to grow heavy. "It is beginning," he observed with scientific interest. "The coldness starts in the feet and rises slowly. Fascinating. Death comes not as a sudden blow, but as a gradual journey." He lay down on the cot, pulling a cloth over his face. His friends gathered around, some weeping openly now, others maintaining the composure they thought he would want them to show. As the poison coursed through his veins, Socrates felt his body growing numb, but his mind remained clear and curious to the end. "Crito," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Please don't forget to pay the debt." They were his final words, a reminder that even in death, obligations must be honored, debts must be paid. The god of healing would receive his due, for death, if Socrates was right, was the ultimate healing, the soul's release from the prison of flesh into the freedom of pure truth. As the sun set over Athens, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, the greatest gadfly in the city's history grew still. But his questions echoed on, rippling outward like stones cast into the infinite pool of human consciousness. 7th Epilogue. The Immortal Gadfly. 20 years had passed since that spring evening when Socrates drank the hemlock, yet his presence still haunted the groves of the academy. Plato, now middle-aged and famous in his own right, walked slowly among the olive trees where he had established his school. Students followed at a respectful distance, hanging on his every word as he expounded the philosophy his master had died for. "You speak often of Socrates," one young man observed, "yet you rarely quote him directly. Why is this?" Plato paused beside an ancient tree, its gnarled trunk testament to centuries of growth and endurance. "Because Socrates believed that wisdom could not be transmitted like goods in the marketplace. Each soul must discover truth for itself through its own questioning and examination. If I merely repeated his words, I would create parrots, not philosophers." The student persisted, "But surely his teachings have some definite content, some doctrines we can learn and apply." "His greatest teaching," Plato replied, "was that we must never stop teaching ourselves. He showed us that the wise man is not one who possesses knowledge, but one who recognizes the limits of his understanding and continues to seek truth despite, or perhaps because of, this recognition. As the afternoon light filtered through the leaves, casting intricate patterns of shadow and gold, Plato's mind drifted to that final day in the prison. He had been there when his master drank the poison, had seen the calm courage with which Socrates faced the ultimate unknown. The memory still had the power to move him to tears, not of grief, but of gratitude for having known such a man. "Master," another student asked, "some say that Socrates' questions were destructive, that he tore down beliefs without building anything to replace them. How do you answer such criticism?" Plato smiled, an expression his students recognized as the prelude to one of his deeper teachings. "Tell me, when a physician lances a wound to let out poison, do we blame him for causing pain? Socrates performed surgery on the soul of Athens, cutting away the infected tissue of false certainty and unexamined prejudice. The operation was painful, but necessary for healing." In the distance, other schools of philosophy were flourishing. Antisthenes taught his version of Socratic ethics, emphasizing virtue over pleasure. Aristippus had founded a school that stressed the importance of immediate enjoyment. Most intriguingly, a young merchant named Zeno had recently arrived from Cyprus, preaching a philosophy that combined Socratic ethics with insights from Heraclitus and the Cynics. He called his followers Stoics, after the painted porch where they gathered to discuss the art of living according to nature and reason. The seeds Socrates planted, Plato mused aloud, have sprouted in many gardens. Some have grown into towering trees, others into flowering shrubs, but all trace their roots back to that barefoot gadfly who wandered the streets of Athens, asking uncomfortable